Let's dive into this study on Indian Grey Hornbills. I'm really excited to dig into this paper you sent me about their nesting habits.
Oh, yeah, it's fascinating stuff. These birds have some really unique strategies, especially when it comes to, like, home and family.
Seriously, their level of commitment would put any reality TV family to shame. But before we get into all the juicy details, can you remind us about the study itself?
Sure, so this research was done in the eastern Ghats of India. They followed 32 active nests over 2 breeding seasons, 2007 and 2008.
Wow, 32 nests. That's a lot of data.
But I think before we even get into the nesting stuff, it might be helpful to set the scene a bit. Most people know hornbills for their kind of striking look, but why are the Eastern Ghats such a prime spot for them specifically?
Well, the Eastern Ghats are this incredible mountain range that runs along the eastern coast of India. It's known for being super biodiverse.
Right, so the tropical climate and all the lush vegetation, I bet it's teeming with life. Oh, absolutely. And it acts as this vital corridor for wildlife moving between different habitats. So, yeah, prime real estate for a bird that's already pretty remarkable.
Okay, so let's talk about those remarkable birds then. Give us the lowdown on what makes the Indian Grey Hornbill so distinctive.
Well, they've got that classic hornbill look, grayish plumage and that prominent bony growth on top of their beak, the casque.
It's like their trademark, almost like a little helmet.
Right. But what's really cool is their ecological role. They're big players in seed dispersal, which keeps the forest healthy and diverse.
They're like the forest gardeners in a way.
Exactly. But the study you shared is all about their nesting behavior, and that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, because we all know birds build nests, but the Indian Grey Hornbill, well, they take it to a whole other level.
Yeah, you could say that. So the nesting season is from March to June, and the researchers were able to watch the whole process.
Like from start to finish.
Pretty much. They saw them searching for the perfect cavity, the males bringing the females food during courtship, and even these cool mating rituals.
Okay, hold on. Mating rituals. We got to hear about this.
Imagine 2 hornbills clinging to each other's beaks, flapping their wings together to make this loud clapping sound.
Wow, that's much more dramatic than your average bird song.
And sometimes they even do these dances on the ground. It's quite a sight. But yeah, once a female chooses her nest cavity, that's when things get really extreme.
That's what I've heard. It's like they go into full-on lockdown mode, right?
Exactly. She basically seals herself inside for the entire incubation period.
Wait, seals herself inside? How does that even work?
She uses this mixture of mud, dung, bark, you name it, even her own droppings.
No way. That's incredible and kind of gross, but mostly incredible. So she's basically creating this secure little chamber, right?
Yeah, with just a tiny slit left open for the male to pass food through.
That's some serious dedication to home security. Is this, like, normal for hornbills? It seems pretty intense.
Oh yeah, it's common to many different hornbill species.
Really? So what's the evolutionary advantage of sealing yourself up like that?
It's thought to protect them from predators. Makes sense if you're in a place with like snakes or monkeys trying to get at your eggs.
Yeah, that's a pretty good deterrent. But speaking of eggs, what about food? Does she just fast for weeks?
Not at all. The male becomes the food delivery guy, bringing her everything she needs through that small opening.
That's a pretty demanding job. I wonder what kind of food they eat. Is it a strict all-fruit diet?
You might think that, but it's actually more diverse. Fruit is a big part, but the researchers actually documented over 13,000 food items. And it included lizards, bird eggs, even other birds sometimes.
Whoa, so not just a fruit salad then. That gives us a lot of insight into their role in the food web. But what about the nest itself? Are they just choosing any old tree cavity?
Nope, they're picky. Most of the nests they studied were in a specific tree species called Melia dubia.
Really? So they're not just settling for any available spot. They're actively seeking out this particular tree.
Yeah, and they used a preference index to prove it wasn't random.
Okay, preference index. Explain that one to me.
It's basically comparing how often the birds actually chose Melia dubia trees versus how many of those trees were even available.
Oh, I see. So if they're choosing Melia dubia more than you'd expect based on chance, then that shows a preference.
Exactly. It scientifically proves they have specific criteria for their nesting sites.
That's really cool. So they're like the discerning home buyers of the bird world. But what is it about this Melia dubia tree that makes it so appealing? Is it just aesthetics?
Well, I think you have to think about it from a hornbill's perspective. They need a nesting site that's safe, easy to access, and secure for the family.
Right, like the ultimate bird sanctuary.
Yeah.
So what did the researchers find out about the Melia dubia that makes them such perfect candidates?
Well, the Millia trees they chose were really tall, like on average 23 meters.
Wow, that's over 70 feet tall.
Yep, and they had massive trunks, averaging 3 meters around. They're going for strength and stability for sure.
But I imagine finding a tree like that with a perfect cavity can't be easy, especially in a busy forest.
You're absolutely right. Competition is fierce. The researchers saw everything from rose-ringed parakeets to squirrels vying for these same spots.
Wow, so it's a real estate battle royale out there.
Yeah.
So they find the right tree, they fight for the best cavity, and then they reuse it.
You got it. They even found evidence that some cavities were reused in the second year of this study, which just goes to show how valuable these nesting locations are.
It's like finding that perfect rent-controlled apartment in a great neighborhood.
Exactly.
All right, so we've talked about the nest, but what about the final outcome? All this effort, the nest sealing, the male bringing food, it has to be for something, right?
Yeah.
What did they find out about the success rate?
Well, out of the 32 nests they tracked, 30 of them were successful, meaning most of the chicks made it to fledgling stage.
Wow, 30 out of 32. That's a pretty impressive success rate. I guess all that effort really pays off, but I'm guessing those 2 unsuccessful nests have a story to tell.
Sadly, yes. Those 2 were predated. The researchers found feathers and broken eggshells, but the culprit is unknown.
Oh, that's a shame. But I guess nature can be harsh sometimes.
It's true, but the fact that so many nests were successful suggests their strategies are working.
Okay, so we've gotten a taste of their nesting habits, but there's so much more to unpack. We haven't even touched on their diet in detail.
You're right, we've just scratched the surface. You know, one thing that really stuck with me from this study was just how much data they collected on the hornbill's diet. Like, remember that number? 13,000 plus food items?
Yeah, I was blown away by that. But what can we actually learn from analyzing, thousands of food deliveries?
It gives us a much clearer picture of their role in the ecosystem. We know they have a diverse diet, but if we break it down, it's really fascinating. For instance, about 64% of what they brought back to the nest was fruit.
That makes sense. Got to keep those energy levels up.
Right. And they weren't just eating any fruit. They actually identified 26 different species.
Wow, 26. That's a lot of variety. They must be playing a huge role in spreading those seeds around.
Exactly. That's why they're so important for the health of the Eastern Ghats. They're basically helping all these different plants reproduce.
It's like they're giving the whole forest a boost just by going about their daily business.
Exactly. It's a win-win for everyone.
Okay, so fruit is a big part of their diet, but what about the other 36%? What else are they bringing back to the nest?
Well, besides the typical insects, the researchers also saw them bringing back lizards.
Lizards? Really?
Yep, and bird eggs, and even small birds occasionally.
Wow, I guess they're not afraid of a little protein. I'm curious, though, how does that part of their diet affect the ecosystem? Are they helping to keep other populations in check?
That's a really good question. This particular study didn't look at that in detail, but it definitely opens up a whole new area of research.
Yeah, you'd need to look at how their seed dispersal role balances with their impact on the animals they prey on.
Right. It's a complex web of interactions, and we only have a small glimpse into it.
It makes you realize how much we still have to learn about even seemingly simple things in nature. Speaking of which, all this talk about food and nesting, is there any drama among the chicks? Do they have to, fight each other for food?
Good question. While this study didn't focus on that, they did mention that 2 fledglings from each successful nest were recorded, suggesting both chicks generally do well.
So both chicks usually make it. That's pretty amazing. I guess both parents are good providers.
Yeah, it seems like it takes a village or, well, a dedicated pair of hornbills to raise a family.
Definitely. But I'm curious, how did the researchers actually study all this behavior? It can't be easy to observe a hornbill nest up close.
No, it definitely takes some ingenuity. They used hides set up near the nests, and they also examined the middens under the trees.
Amazing.
Basically, the piles of discarded food and waste.
Ah, so it's kind of like bird CSI. They're piecing together clues from the leftovers.
Yeah, and it gives them valuable information without disturbing the birds themselves.
That's really clever. So we talked about their preference for Millia trees, but what about those trees specifically? What makes them suitable?
That's a great point. The researchers actually measured a bunch of stuff about the trees. Girth, height, the height of the cavity, even the size of the entrance hole.
Wow, they were really thorough. Did they find any patterns in those measurements?
Oh yeah, for sure. They consistently chose trees that were super tall, averaging 23 meters.
That's like 7 stories tall.
And the trunks were massive, averaging 3 meters around.
Wow, they're not messing around when it comes to real estate.
Nope. And the nests themselves were usually around 14 meters above ground, so still quite high. And they liked them deep, too, about 51 centimeters on average.
So they're not just looking for any old hole. They've got standards.
Okay.
What about the entrance hole? That seems important for security, right?
Absolutely. The average entrance hole was pretty small, about 15 centimeters long and 12 centimeters wide, just enough for the male to get through.
Like a custom-built door. It's amazing how their nesting strategy is so perfectly adapted to their environment.
Right. Everything from the tree choice to the cavity size is about maximizing their chances of success.
Okay, but hold on. You said riverine habitats a few times. What exactly does that mean?
It basically means areas along rivers and streams. You know, they tend to have fertile soil, lots of water, and a unique mix of plants and animals.
So maybe the hornbills choose Miliadubia trees that are specifically near these riverine areas.
That's a good possibility. It makes sense that they'd want to be close to a reliable water source, especially during a breeding season.
It makes their house hunting even more challenging, though. But you mentioned competition earlier. It wasn't just the hornbills using those trees.
Oh, yeah. The study found rose-ringed parakeets and golden-backed woodpeckers using those trees, too, sometimes even sharing the same tree.
Wow. So it's a real community living situation up there. I wonder if there are, rules about who gets which cavity.
That's a great question, and something this study didn't address. But it would be really interesting to see how different species navigate those shared spaces.
Yeah, do they get along? Do they fight? So much more to learn.
Right. It's amazing how one study can lead to so many new questions and avenues for research.
It's like peeling back layers of an onion. We started with hornbill nests, and now we're thinking about interspecies relationships and the whole ecosystem.
Exactly. It just goes to show how everything is interconnected, even in ways we might not always see.
So if we're talking about protecting these hornbills, it's not enough to just focus on them. We need to think about their whole habitat.
Absolutely. Protecting the creeks, the rivers, and the relationships between all the species is crucial.
Okay, but are there any other species that actually benefit from the hornbills being there? Do they have any allies?
That's a great question. It's outside the scope of this particular study, but it's a great example of how research can spark new lines of thinking.
So it's something we need to explore further. But what kind of benefits could other species get from the hornbills?
Well, think about their seed dispersal again. They're basically spreading seeds all over the forest.
Right, they're like nature's Johnny Appleseeds.
Exactly, and those seeds can benefit all sorts of creatures, not just plants.
So you could have this whole network of animals indirectly benefiting from the hornbills.
Exactly. It highlights how one species can have a huge ripple effect on the entire ecosystem.
But it also makes you realize how fragile that balance is if something were to happen to the hornbills.
It would have consequences for countless other species.
It really underscores the importance of conservation efforts.
For sure. Protecting one species often means protecting an entire web of life.
Okay, my brain is officially overflowing with amazing hornbill facts. We've gone from nests to diets to entire ecosystems. What's next?
Well, we've still got one more part to go. We've talked about their behavior and their role in the ecosystem, but what about the threats they face? What about conservation efforts?
Right, we can't forget about that. Okay, so we spent the last 2 parts of this deep dive really getting to know the Indian Grey Hornbill, their habits, their role in the ecosystem, all that good stuff. But like a lot of species, they're facing some serious challenges, right?
Yeah, it's true. And unfortunately, some of those challenges are because of us, humans.
Right. In the last part, we talked about how important those riverine habitats are for nesting. The study mentioned some threats to those areas. What did they say about that?
Well, they highlighted a few things, like cattle grazing and people removing branches for livestock feed. And then there's also, agriculture expanding into those riverine forests. It's basically a competition for space and resources.
So even if we're not directly going after the hornbills, our actions can still have a big impact.
Exactly. And it's a good reminder that we need to be more aware of how our choices affect the environment as a whole.
Definitely. So shifting gears a bit, we've talked about how dedicated the male hornbill is to bringing food to the female while she's incubating the eggs. But what happens after she emerges? Does she just take a break from parenting at that point?
Oh, no, not at all. Actually, once the female comes out, she joins the male in feeding the chicks. So they're both working hard to keep those little ones fed.
That's awesome. So it's a real team effort.
Yep. And it makes sense, right? Raising chicks takes a lot of energy, so having both parents involved really increases the chicks' chances of survival.
Yeah, it's a strategy that's clearly been successful for them. Okay, so thinking about all the things we've learned, What can we actually do to help make sure these amazing birds keep thriving? Did this study offer any suggestions for conservation?
One of the biggest things they emphasized was protecting those tall, strong Melia dubia trees in the riverine habitat.
Right, because those are like prime real estate for the hornbills.
Exactly. So it's about doing things like sustainable forestry, creating protected areas, and finding ways for humans and wildlife to coexist peacefully.
Sounds like it takes a lot of collaboration.
It does, but it's definitely possible. With scientists, conservationists, local communities, and policymakers all working together, we can make a real difference.
It's encouraging to hear that there are things we can do to help. Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about the Indian Grey Hornbill, from their unique nesting habits to their crucial role in the ecosystem.
Me too. It's a great example of how much wonder there is in the natural world, and how even a single species can teach us so much.
And remind us how important it is to protect it all. Thanks for taking us on this journey.
Absolutely, it's been a pleasure. And to all our listeners, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep caring about our planet.